My Lords, I support the Noble Lord Jackson in his amendments and am moving my own in this sphere. These amendments do aim to remove the requirements that clubs need to submit EDI statements to the independent football regulator, detailing their plans to improve, as we've heard, equality, diversity, inclusion policies. This requirement was added to the original bill by the government and, in my view, is unnecessary and burdensome, and it could act as a Trojan horse for politicising clubs in ways that will be divisive. Firstly, as the Noble Lord Pannick has just explained, it's a duplication of work that's already done by many clubs. The Premier League and the EFL already require their clubs to do work in this space to comply with the EDI standards of those leagues. So can the Minister explain if the expectation is that they need to do more or do EDI differently, and what does improve comprise of? Also, perhaps the Minister can elaborate what she envisages will trigger sanctions for non-compliance, what non-compliance would look like. This especially matters for all those clubs this bill will regulate beyond the Premier League and the EFL, all those National League clubs which operate on the tightest of margins with very small staff and volunteer teams. Think of the sanctions. Clubs could face the IFL publication of a censure statement and/or requirement to appoint an external EDI professional, and they don't come cheap, or face financial penalties, or ultimately suspension or revocation of their operating licence. So there is a cost to pay and a lot of pressure to comply that could well generate substantial financial and time burdens on clubs. All the evidence shows across a multitude of institutions that EDI regulatory regimes often divert scarce time, attention and resources away from the core mission and priorities of organisations. It also has a tendency to expand its remit, because one of the most obvious ways that regulated organisations prove their EDI credentials are ever more elaborate, flashy guidance documents, mandated training programmes, unconscious bias workshops and so on. It's a perfect example of a well-meaning policy that grows and proliferates, an exemplar of self-fulfilling mission creep. It was recently revealed, for example, that Oxford University now employs 59 staff in EDI roles, a 20% increase since 2022, at the cost of £2.5 million a year before pensions and benefits. And this seems baffling given the dire state of university finances. Such concerns of EDI's bureaucratic and financial burdens, however, are not confined to a few of us here. As we've heard, last week 2 regulators also made similar points. The Financial Conduct Authority and Prudential Regulation Authority did announce their decision to abandon plans to impose diversity and inclusion rules on financial firms. Surely this must give the Minister pause for thought. It's surely not too late to consider deferring this section of the bill, to consider such adverse outcomes and to consult on specifically this issue from stakeholders, fans, etc. Because if you listen to the debate within the financial services sector, it's instructive. Wendy Saunders, a partner and head of financial services at Lewis Selkin, said it was a huge relief that the FCA was no longer proceeding with its diversity and inclusion proposals, which she said, quote, would have imposed unwarranted costs on firms without delivering clear benefits. Instead, the regulators in financial services will limit their role to voluntary industry initiatives, and I'm not opposed to that. Surely such a voluntary approach is appropriate for football too. Requiring the new football regulator to impose what other regulators admit are too burdensome is not proportionate. But my key question to the Minister still is, what problem is this measure a solution to? We heard at committee, and we've heard since, that there's a concern about the lack of diversity at club senior management level. But there's really little evidence that EDI in practice, whatever its good intentions as a theory, will resolve this problem. I'd be reassured if the government elaborated on how it envisages EDI policies will operate in relation to HR and employment in individual clubs, because EDI has a very poor track record in improving workplace culture. The opposite is often true. Last week, Trevor Phillips wrote an insightful comment piece in the Times entitled "There's a Better Way Than DEI to Fix Prejudice." In it, Phillips warns of the way that EDI policies can stir up resentment and competitive victimhood that will do little but cause conflicts in workplaces. And he says, DEI programmes increasingly appear not to be aimed at making the workplace a better, more productive environment, but a modern-day inquisition dedicated to damning white men merely for their existence. And meanwhile, at King's College, members of staff were told they couldn't get promoted unless they signed up to the whole of the university's EDI initiatives, and that included taking part in activities run by Stonewall, an organisation now considered so controversial it's been largely ejected from activities in Parliament and Whitehall. EDI training at Imperial College, meanwhile, includes how to be a white ally, and staff have been asked to agree that they have white privilege. And I just want to know whether the Minister envisages that is a productive thing if that's what would happen in clubs. And is that what she thinks EDI in clubs will look like? Because it certainly looks like that in many organisations. Does the Minister see the dangers of this introducing a contentious and politicised agenda into clubs culture? And while EDI is often framed as fostering better decision-making, in reality, EDI often reinforces groupthink in workplaces. I'm just worried about unintentionally that this seemingly small part of the bill will drag football clubs into a murky political territory. To note, a judicial minefield is here. For example, if clubs chose to set quotas to fulfil their EDI requirements based on people's protected characteristics, won't that open up the gate to biological males who identify as women being able to play in women's sports? And this is such a political and ethical topic, and you see all the controversies the FA is involved in here that the noble Lord Treisman spoke so passionately about at committee. And I'm not suggesting that noble lords have to agree with my sex-realist, gender-critical views on this, but can I urge the government to wait at least for the judgment by the Supreme Court in the For London Scotland versus Scottish ministers, which relates to the definition of a woman and how a trans woman fits in under the Equality Act. Is there a danger that EDI provisions could unintentionally open clubs up to being challenged in the courts and make them subject to spurious litigation in this area? In fact, over the weekend, one of the biggest girls' football leagues in the country, West Riding Girls Football League, we've found out is being threatened by the Football Association with being shut down for refusing to allow boys to play in its matches. Last week, an emergency meeting was held by organisers of the league, which has at least, by the way, 6,000 under-18 girls playing across more than 300 teams. Fantastic progress in girls and football. And at that meeting, managers voiced their concerns that allowing boys to play would open the floodgates and is a massive threat to the girls' game. Parents are looking to take their daughters out of the league, girls themselves saying that they'll give up if boys joined, and the FA's response is that this is part of our inclusion and diversity strategy. So you don't have to agree with me. And I know, my noble lords, and some ministers, maybe the Minister, thinks and will maybe dismiss these concerns as all a bit culture warsy, even a bit Trumpite, and nothing could be further from the truth. So to reassure the Minister, I'd like to call on one of her cabinet as an ally. Wes Streeting told a Macmillan Cancer Support event, sometimes there are some really daft things being done in the name of EDI which undermine the case. For example, there was one member of NHS staff who was merrily tweeting a job ad online and saying part of her practice was anti-whiteness. And I just thought, says Wes Streeting, what the hell does that say to the bloke in Wigan who's more likely to die earlier than his more affluent white counterpart in London? Wes Streeting concluded on stressing that the real issue of inequality that affects working class people is not addressed here, and called for the ideological hobby horse of EDI needing to go. I agree, and I think we should drop it from this bill, and that does not mean that we shouldn't fight tooth and nail for equality and fairness in all walks of life.